All right, we'll get started by cloning the repo. We go into the folder and we launch the installer. We launch the installer, it'll ask if we want to do a quick setup without advanced configuration. For the sake of the video, we will just go ahead and show the advanced configuration. So it asks if you want to automatically update. The default is yes. We do want to automatically update so that we have the latest and greatest. If we were to set an API key, we do not for the demo, but you are able to set an API key so that your instance is a little more secure. The hubs are if you want to have your own fork for different prompts, chains, or extensions that you want to load every time you have to set this up somewhere else. We're just going to use the default one. Default is 10 for the workers. The workers are basically how many threads it's allowed to use. So I will keep that with 10. And I personally do intend to run local models, so I will say yes. And I do intend to run the text generation web UI. This is only supported for NVIDIA with our setup, so if you have NVIDIA, you can say yes, otherwise say no. GPU compute capability is found at this link here. My card is an 8.9, so I'm going to enter 8.9, but you can go to that website and find yours. And the default parameters, you don't have to change these. You can just hit enter. You only have to change these if you have your own instance set up and you know that you want to run additional parameters. We do not need to run a database with this. We're just going to use a regular file structure. And that brings us right to our main screen here. And for this, for most people, you're just going to run option 1. So that is just for if you want to run any providers that are remote and aren't going to be locally hosted. For my purposes, I want to be fully locally hosted, so I don't want to rely on any third-party providers. I want to only have everything happen on my own machine, so I'm going to choose option 3. Most people are going to choose option 1 because the hardware requirements to run option 3 are heavy. So we're going to go ahead and launch this. This is going to run the Oobabooga text generation web UI, which I have set up already with Vicuna as my large language model. And Stable Diffusion, I have, it just is going to download the default Stable Diffusion model. It's already downloaded the models. They're already in my folder. But that part for first launch will probably take a few minutes to download the models. And let me switch what I'm sharing here. Okay, should see a quick start guide now. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the Oobabooga text generation web UI first. And we're going to load up a model. I have a lot of models. We are going to choose this Vicuna 13B that has 16K token context. These are the proper settings for this. I'm running a RTX 4090 GPU, so I can have a lot of GPU layers. Depending on how much video RAM you have is how many GPU layers you're able to have depending on the model. And it's different for every model from my experience. So I run 40 layers off of this so that it doesn't interfere with my Stable Diffusion. and then the rest of it off of my regular memory. So I'm going to load the model. Takes a moment. In my terminal, it says that that's using 11 gigs of my video RAM. So that keeps me under my 24, even with Stable Diffusion running. So now we have the model loaded up. That's all we have to do in Ooba. We don't have to do anything else here. So now we go to AGiXT's interface. And we'll go to agent management first. So I've already set up a Vicuna agent. This agent is in the open source hub, so you don't have to actually set any of these settings. They're already there. So we can go through these settings a little bit. If you want to change your helper agent to a different one, you can. I usually set mine to my OpenAI agents if I need to. We can basically leave everything default here, but if you want to change any of the temperature settings or anything like that, you can go through and actually modify any of the same settings that you would change in the text generation web UI, including setting the prefix and suffix for the prompts and the stop strings. We've got file system settings. So file system extension allows the AI to read and write files and execute Python code. We have text-to-speech settings. You can change the voice for this depending on the different Streamlabs text-to-speech models. Whisper speech-to-text models, you can change that based on whatever speech-to-text model you want. The base one seems to work really well. Hugging Face settings, API key if you want to utilize Stable Diffusion remotely with Hugging Face or any of the text-to-speech or speech-to-text features through Hugging Face. Discord, DALL-E uses an OpenAI API key for generating images remotely. Web search with Google, you'll have to put in an API key with that. If you want your agent to be connected up to a GitHub repository and have full access to it, you can put your personal access token here and your GitHub username or organization. Stable Diffusion, this is the link, or this is the URL for the Stable Diffusion. It uses 7860 as the port here, even though that's not what we use to access it. We use 7861 to access it, so if you want to access Stable Diffusion, you don't go to Stable Diffusion, you go to local localhost 7861, and here's your Stable Diffusion where you can do everything. It's the automatic 1111 Stable Diffusion. Back here, you could also just give for the Stable Diffusion settings, you can give it an API key, or you can give it a remote URL for doing this through Hugging Face rather than through a local Stable Diffusion. The default for this is that. This is overridden settings for the Vicuna agent. Google's text-to-speech, 11 Labs text-to-speech or speech-to-text. SendGrid if you want to set up email so that you can set up automatic emails. Cirix is for search engine. If you want to use their third-party search engine software, you can also install your own Cirix instance on your own machine and use that for enhanced privacy. And Twitter settings for the use of any Twitter commands. And then here are all of the commands you can select one by one to grant the agent access. So selecting all is not recommended, just choose a few commands that each agent should have. And then you can update your agent settings. You'll notice I didn't select any because I don't need this agent to do any of those things. And then you can update your agent settings if you changed any. Here's where you can wipe your agent's memories or delete the agent. So the next thing is going to be the website training. And 1 second here, and I will pull up links here for that. So what we're going to do for the website training is we're going to go ahead and train our Vicuna agent on everything that we know about AGIXT, basically. But first, before that, we're going to go to the memory management, and we're going to say, what do you know about AGIXT? We're going to ask it, and it finished running, and it says it doesn't know anything because it hasn't learned anything about it yet. So we're going to go here to the training. There's multiple training modes you can either do from websites, or we can just scrape URLs. Go to files. We can drop a zip file, any kind of plain text, PDFs. You can drop as many files in here as you want, and it will learn those to its long-term memory. Text, if you want to specifically correlate a question with an answer, this is where you would do that. So if you want to say, what do you know about AGIXT? And then specifically say it's an automation software. You could put that here. Or you could learn an entire GitHub repository. Use a different branch other than main if people use different branches. Or if it's a private repository, you can tell it to use the agent settings for the GitHub credentials, or you can just override those here. What we're going to do is go to the website training. One of the important parts here is the advanced options because we have different memory collections. This isn't important for everybody, but it is for developers. The default long-term memory storage is what we will use for this, but we have different web search storage so that web searches don't pollute the context when they're used. We have reinforcement learning through human feedback, where you can actually say positive feedback or negative feedback for any kind of responses that the AI gave, and it will put those in that collection so that you can utilize that information later for training models, for like fine-tuning them. So you can export all that. We don't need to use those for now, so what we're going to do is we're going to paste. It's just a list of links from our documentation, which is just agixt.com. It forwards to this. Then we're going to tell it to train on all of those. So take a minute. It's going to scrape every one of these websites for every bit of information that's on them. Once it's finished, then we can go and interact with the agent and ask it questions about AGIXT, or however we would like. Almost done. There we go. So now it says that it's learned from the following websites, lists every single one of them out. Now we can go back to our memory management and let's try again. What do you know about AGIXT? Okay, now we've got some actual memories here and relevance scores for each memory. So this is how they're actually going to be laid out whenever you prompt the agent with this exact question, what do you know about AGIXT? It's going to inject all of these memories here with these scores. And we got timestamps of when they were created. So all of these were just created. We can delete some if we want. So if we say this is not that important, or if we trained it on a website and part of the memory that it got for something is, say, an advertisement or something, you want to come in and delete that memory. You don't want to push it out to production with that information in context. So now that we have that, we can also go to advanced options here, and we can choose a lot better, more granular things here. So here's our information about our predefined memory collections again. You can choose which collection you're querying here. You can choose how many results we're getting. So let's say I want 15 results instead of 10. Let's say I don't want anything that's less relevant than 0.5. We can do this again. And we only got 4 memories because that was all that was relevant to up to 0.5. But if I, change this back to 0.2, query again, we get 15 memories. So now this is where we can go to our interactions. We can set up a new conversation. Vicuna, so we're going to talk AGiXT with Big Vicuna here. And we're just in the chat mode here. So several modes. We can do chat, chains, prompt, or instruct. Instruct, it will allow the AI to autonomously execute commands that it has enabled. The chat will not use commands. So if you have commands enabled, you don't have to worry about using the chat with any of that. But if you're in instruct mode and you have commands enabled, be aware your AI will do whatever you've given it access to do, even if it doesn't need to sometimes. So for now, we're just going to be on the chat mode. We will show some advanced options here because by default, it only injects 5 memories. I want to inject a little bit more than that. You don't have to, but we have a 16K context model, so 5 memories that are only 250 tokens, it's not all that much. We're not utilizing that very much. We only want to inject the memories from the default collection. However, if you want, you can inject memories from more than one collection. So it will always inject from the default if context is called, but if you increase this to 1, it will also inject web search storage. We don't need that though. Actually, this was conversation results. We want to leave that at 5. We want to change memory inject into 15. And then you can browse links within the user input if you would like. That would read those into long-term memory if you turn that on. Enabling web search will make it search the web for whatever you wanted and then store that in collection 1 and then respond with information with that. And then enable memory training. This is disabled by default. This would correlate whatever I am saying right now with the response that the AI is about to give me directly, like without any kind of feedback. So we generally don't do that. So we're going to go ahead and send this. Since this is running locally, it might take just a moment to get a response here. We can see we're running here at the top. Just a reminder, this is a 13 billion parameter Vicuna model. It's got 16K context, fully locally run. Only uses 11 gigs of video RAM with 40 layers at least. I think fully loaded, it's like 17 gigs of VRAM. We've got a response here, as I've previously mentioned. Okay, so it has some conversation context, it thinks. Let's see. So it gave a pretty decent answer here. That website's definitely incorrect. That was a little bit of a hallucination there, but the rest of it is pretty accurate. We can also start a new conversation. And it won't remember anything that we just talked about in this conversation. And this time we'll just only inject the default 5 results here. Let's ask it again what it can tell us. This is like a full new session. It doesn't remember anything we just talked about. But it's still trained on the documentation. Well, now we have another response here. It's also pretty good. So now that we've got that, we can kind of move on to a couple other things here. So the prompt mode is basically you can set up custom prompts. We can check the custom prompts out here. You can create new ones, or a lot of people just have these copy paste out text files that they're constantly having to paste this or that into, a conversation with ChatGPT or something. But here we can go and we can actually make some templates, and we have some predefined prompt injection variables. So you can see, right here, name and age would be the injected variables here. I have some predefined ones like agent name. Context will give you context from memory as long as you have user input there, because it uses user input for the query. Date will give you the current timestamp. It's helpful for a lot of things. You wouldn't think so, but a lot of these models don't think that they know anything past the current date. But if you give it a date and give it relevant information, it kind of makes it disregard that thought. Then we've got conversation history, which will give the last 5 interactions by default, but you can override that. Then we've got commands in all caps. Commands in all caps will make the AI autonomously execute the commands if you have that enabled for your agent. Command list will just tell the agent what it has access to execute, and then if it chooses to execute something, you can do something with that information, but you don't have to. The steps are for running in chains, so these are predefined injection variables to make sure that you don't inadvertently use these for something else and kind of get input injected that you wouldn't normally expect. Just look at a chat one here. So the chat prompt, which is what chat mode is entirely based on, this is what chat mode is. It is the context injected from long-term memory. It says you are whatever the agent's name is, and you're an expert at answering the user's questions. It tells it to use the available context to help answer those questions, so it knows to refer to what it remembers. And we have some conversation history here so that it has some context built up about what we've been talking about, and then whatever your latest input was. And it keeps that going on in the background. You just never see any of that other than your user input and its response. And that's how all of the prompts work. So if you want to write a haiku, you could say, write a poem about this subject. And then if you want to add some additional input to that, like make it funny, you can. So we can go to, let's see. We're going to go the interactions. I'll just create a new one here called poem. And we are going to wipe this agent's memory because it's going to just have a lot of context about AGiXT that it doesn't need if context is injected anywhere. This is the quick, easy way to start over with your agent without losing any of your settings. Now, if we go back here, say, what do you know? You know nothing. Okay. So now we're going to change to prompt mode. We're going to say, write a poem. So the different categories here, these are generally just for different models. So if you put the model name as whatever matches your agent configuration here, you will override whatever the default category prompt is if it has the same name. So we're just going to stay with that. So we write a poem about dragons. My input is, let's make it funny. We don't need any of our additional options, but we do have all of those same advanced options that we had in the chat mode. Those exist in anything that prompts. So we will get a funny poem about dragons. All right, I see. So you want me to Not sure if it's a poem, but there you go. And so then we have our other modes. So we're going to do a new conversation. Let's say chain. So we're going to do a stable diffusion chain here. So under chains, we're going to go and we're going to choose. We're going to choose to make a chain because we don't have it yet. So under chain management, you can use all those predefined prompt variables that we were talking about earlier. You can import a chain if you have a JSON file of the chain, but for this, we're just going to go ahead and make it. We're going to say generate image with stable diffusion. Okay, then we're going to modify. I don't know if I actually created it. One sec. Yeah, there we are. So we're going to choose our Vicuna agent to do all the work here so that we're just fully running this locally. We have an awesome contributor that put in a prompt for generating stable diffusion images here. And we're just going to leave the user input as user input. You can also show all of those advanced options that you did in all the other prompt modes. So how many results to inject, if any, how many shots, which is how many times it's going to prompt the AI, which collections to inject memories from. If you want to override any of that, you can. You don't have to. We're going to add a new step now that we've added that one. So the second step in the chain is going to be a command. So the command we want is generate image with stable diffusion. So this is one of the command extensions, and then the prompt. Since this first one is the prompt generator, we just want to say step 1 as our prompt. So we want to take the response from step 1 as the prompt for step 2. Now, we don't really need to modify any of this, but you can. Any field that's configurable in Stable Diffusion should be configurable here. And then we're adding that step. Now we have a 2-step chain. And we can go to Agent Interactions. Go back to Chain Mode. You can override the agent if you want. We did set this to Vicuna, but we'll just do it anyway. And we're going to generate an image with Stable Diffusion. So this is where we would put the input of what kind of image we want to actually generate. And then we've got all of these options here if we wanted to override any of the fields that are in this chain. So if I want to say, I know I want to save this file as, batman.png, then I can. We'll say Batman flying in the sky. So there's advanced options for chains as well. If you want to do those, you can either run a single step, you can start from a specific step, or you can say to show all responses instead of just the last response. The way that we have this set up is it only shows the last response from the chain. So that's just the completion of the chain. So now we've got what we want overridden, and we're just going to run the chain. Doing things in the background here. It's running. My video card is spinning up, so I know that Vicuna is doing work. Vicuna generated a prompt. And Stable Diffusion is generating an image. I'm looking at this in the terminal right now while it's doing it. And it says that it has saved batman.png to our workspace. See if I can open that. Almost there. And we have batman.png here. Let's see. All right, here we have our batman.png. Probably could have done better, but we have Batman. Share my screen again. Back on the agent interactions here. Okay. So that is that. Got all kinds of conversations here. Okay, James, I think I've hit everything.